Welcome to the show. It's so good to have you with me. This week I'm thrilled to be joined by a true rock and roll legend, Dion DiMucci, better known to the world simply as Dion. You probably know him best as the voice behind classics like Run Around Sue and The Wanderer, but there's so much more to Dion than all of those timeless hits. In this episode, Dion opens up about his incredible journey. It's an honest, heartfelt and often funny chat with one of the true survivors of rock and roll.
I love creating, ever since I was a kid. I was hurled into this place of enchantment by Jimmy Reed and Hank Williams. And I think my whole life, I've never really changed. I love creating a song or a book or a play or whatever I'm doing to take people on a trip and to take them to a place of enchantment, pleasure, delight, somewhere transcendent that lifts them to maybe to a place they've never been. But it's that 12-year-old inside of me that got touched so deeply that I'd like to transmit that feeling to others. It was street music, homemade music. We didn't have instruments. We just had our voices to work with. So we just struck up harmonies and rhythms and made music on the streets.
What were you drawing on to create that sort of music?
I would say I just had a gift. I was creative. I drew from the Apollo Theater Band in Harlem. When I went down to the Apollo Theater, I'd hear these sax players. They had a section of saxophones and a section of horns, and they'd play like ba da 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 da, and I'd come running back to the neighborhood and I'd say, "Hey guys, do this, Ruby, 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 baby." We were like a poor man's horn section.
You worked tirelessly at it, didn't you? I mean, as far as I can gather, you guys were always on the street corners. You met, you rehearsed, you created.
Well, I don't think we called it work, Sandy. We were having a lot of fun, and it was interesting finding solutions to these songs, and harmonies. And we weren't attached to any genre or rules or, you couldn't put a label on us. We just did what we felt like doing rhythmically, lyrically, percussion. We didn't know how to write words too well. But then when we got a record contract, when I got a record contract, we ran into some real songwriters who helped us out.
How did you get that record contract in the first place?
Well, this is just fortune where I was born. If I was born maybe in Nebraska, I wouldn't have had the chance to do this. But I was brought up in the Bronx, and there was a songwriter who knew two brothers who were opening a record company. They took me down to Manhattan, which was a little train ride from my neighborhood. And I took my guitar and sang a few songs for them, and off I went. They loved what I did. I came in and sang them, let's see, I think it was a Lloyd Price song and a Carl Perkins tune, and maybe a Fats Domino song, a backside called Rosalie. And they loved what I did, and they signed me right there. I lucked out.
So what did that record contract mean for you?
Well, it opened up my whole world, Sandy. I have a gift writing songs, communicating songs, and putting arrangements together. And I went on tour with Sam Cooke and Bobby Darin and Buddy Holly and up until the present with Eric Clapton. My last few albums I did with Clapton and Paul Simon and Samantha Fish, even young women who were new in the business, It's just opened up my whole world and everybody in between.
When you did first get that record contract and started heading off on tour, were you writing your own songs then, or did you have writers that were creating those very first hits?
A little of both. We'd have a writer come in with a song, and yet we were writing our own things. I
So,
wrote Run Around Through and Donna the Prima Donna I was writing. I was having a good time just putting these songs together.
Dion, you started to become known for those slightly self pitying, sort of pained stories to adolescence and early adulthood. They really started to characterize a lot of your work from then on, didn't they?
Well, Chuck Berry was writing about school and cars, and I guess Paul Anka was writing "Put Your Head on My Shoulder," all these very romantic songs. And I just thought, let me do something like The Wanderer or, like Little Diane. I think the self-pity songs were coming from outside the company. I kind of rebelled against them. The self-pity songs, I didn't care for much. I thought, let's have a harder edge. Let's talk about something contentious in a relationship instead of the namby-pamby thing. Yeah, I was looking to do something a little different.
You were a little different yourself too, weren't you? Because you had that kind of cocky, suave edge about you. You weren't a soft.
Yeah, what they call them in England, Teddy boys. I was in a gang, and that's the way I started out. I had a friend, a black friend who he was a superintendent of a tenement building, a janitor, and he played blues. His name was Willie Green. He was through a lot, and he overcame drinking and drugging, and he came into a brighter spot. And he always would tell me, Dion, I don't see your future with these guys. I think you have much more to do. I don't know. He kind of pushed me out of that gang style. I started hanging out in Manhattan with the theater people. I liked creative people, so I started hanging out with creative people. I still wake up with that passion. I haven't changed much.
Yeah. You're lucky that you did have the guides that you had at the time because despite having a recording contract and despite making some huge hits then, you were going through a difficult time yourself personally, weren't you?
Well, my father never had a real job, and my mother was totally super responsible. She had two jobs, and they would always be arguing, over the rent money, the $36 a month rent. And that was an everyday argument. And, I really didn't know how to, when you're a kid, you just don't know how to make sense of your emotions or get a handle on it or get some perspective on it, and sometimes you just build a whole personality around these insecurities. And that's what I started doing. I just didn't know where to place them or how to get over on them or make sense of them. So, man, when I took that first drug, I was like, yeah, no, now this is where it's at.
You're
I
going to
didn't have to
say.
second guess anything.
That did cost you around 5 years of your early career, didn't it? Because you pulled right back from doing what you love to do.
Well, that stuff could take your life. It's not good. You think you found heaven, you found hell. I was using drugs in the mid 60s, heroin. I was running the streets with Frankie Lyman, another lead singer of a group that I was hanging out with, and he overdosed and died. And it scared me. And a month later, I gave up everything. Man, I never looked back. I got clean and sober, and I've been clean and sober 57 years.
In 1968, you've emerged as a bit of a gentle folk rocker. And that first hit that you had at that point was Abraham Martin and John. That was a very different Dion that we saw.
Well, in the mid 60s, I guess nobody was watching me. So I was hanging out in Greenwich Village. And, it was the folk era. So I would be hanging out with Tom Paxton or John Sebastian from the Loving Spoonful. And Richie Havens was down there. And Bob Dylan came down into the village. And Tim Hardin, unfortunately, heroin brought him down. He died. But I loved him. He wrote some beautiful songs. And I bought some picks and I was picking the guitar. So by the time 1968 rolled around, I was ready to do Abraham Martin and John because I had been picking and I was writing much more frequently. I became more of a writer of my own material. That song and I, stars are in the right place.
Yeah, you'd certainly changed with the times already. The doo-wop had slid away. And then again, come the early 70s, the times changed again. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with Phil Spector, and then Dave Edmunds and Lou Reed also came across your path?
Lou Reed, we were always close, just guys from the streets, and we liked guitars and writing and just taking each other on a trip. Phil Spector, that came about in I would say the mid 70s. I remember that clearly. I wrote about it in a new book I put out called The Rock and Roll Philosopher. I was on the beach at Malibu next door to Neil Diamond. So I was walking the beach with him. And just about that time, Phil Spector was handed the roster over at Warner Brothers Record Company. And they asked him who he would like to produce. And he said, Dion. So we started producing an album. Man, it was a crazy time in my life because he just came off doing an album with John Lennon and Harry Nilsson. Nilsson lost his voice. It was a very chaotic session and everything. But I had been clean and sober for about 7 years, so I had a little wisdom under my belt. I could handle them. So we went in and recorded this album. Bruce Springsteen and Little Steven would hang out in the control room, and Cher and Greg Allman and Jack Nicholson. And, everybody wanted to be around Phil Spector. He was a legend. There he is in his white wig and his white jumpsuit with his 357 Magnum and his waving it around, pointing it at Bruce Springsteen, saying, you want to know how to make a freaking record? I'll show you how to make a record. Like Bruce Springsteen really needs some help making a record.
Was it your first introduction to people like Bruce and Stevie Van Zandt and the like?
Well, I knew Stevie. He was part of my band in the early 70s. So we were friends. Yeah, when they got to California, he called me, said, Dion, Bruce and I would love to come over and meet Phil Spector. So I got them in to meet him, but then he started abusing them, but they didn't care. They felt like it was Don Rickles, chumping on them. So they rolled with it.
There was one incident I didn't mention at the beginning, if you don't mind just jumping back a little bit for me, because in 1959, when you were 19 years old, you were on the tour with Buddy Holly's Winter Dance Party. And it was only because of luck, really, that you weren't on that plane where Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper and Richie Valens actually crashed, were you?
Yeah, that was a traumatic time in my life. It was a really mixed up time for me because I was 19 and it was like one of the best things that ever happened in my life, touring with Buddy Holly and Richie Valens and the Bopper, who was a great songwriter and a great guy. And, to have it ripped out from underneath you, like the floor just was torn out beneath me. That we were crisscrossing the Midwest in this little yellow school bus, and it kept breaking down in between towns, and it was like 20 below zero, and it was cold, and the heater on the bus kept breaking, and the belts kept snapping, and I'm telling you, it was cold. In fact, Buddy Holly's drummer caught frostbite. We had to leave him at a hospital because he was so cold. He put on 5 pair of socks, and that kept the cold in. He didn't end up too good. He almost lost his foot. Yeah, Buddy Holly got tired of that kind of, the bus breaking down, and he just got tired of it. And he was 22 years old, and he was a very decisive. He was very statuesque, but I remember him being very decisive, and he decided to charter a plane, a one-engine, 4-seater, and the pilot and him, and there was 2 other seats, and there was Richie, the Big Bopper, and myself. There was only 2 other seats, so we had to flip a coin. I won the coin toss, but when he told me it was $36 to get on the flight, my head hadn't stretched out to paying a whole month's rent that my parents were arguing about all my life. I just said, no, I said, I gave my seat to Richie. And, that plane must have crashed about 5 minutes after it took off. So I those guys, and they affected me on a lot of levels. They really inspired me. They were great guys, great songwriters, friends, buddies. They were like family, you know.
Did your parents live long enough to see your success?
They did. They did. My mother died. She was 104. Yeah, she saw most of it. I think she was proud of me. I mean, they never said anything. Never said I'm proud of you or anything like that. Unfortunately, they just didn't know how to express themselves
Yeah, it was that
to,
generation, wasn't it? They weren't brought up like that at all themselves.
no,
Huh.
they weren't.
I'd imagine you took over those $36 a month rent payments for them, though.
Yeah, I did put them on the payroll. I did.
I had no doubt about that.
I was thinking that I just went to pay taxes, and I probably paid more taxes than my 10 uncles on my mother's side and 9 uncles on my father's, that the whole family made in a whole lifetime. What they earned in a whole lifetime, I probably paid more in taxes.
Yeah. Was the family into music?
Nobody in my family. No, my father had no rhythm at all. I don't know. I call myself a rhythm singer. He had absolutely no rhythm. He didn't even know what it was.
So your talents just sprung out of nowhere. I know that you've been really hooked on the blues all your life. And you've carried that through with your through the whole career too, haven't you?
Absolutely. Yeah, I started out with Jimmy Reed and Hank Williams. And over here in the States, they usually refer to the Beatles as like the British invasion. I thought it was the British infusion because I think the UK they understood American music better than Americans, the roots. They could connect the dots. Over here, we were just interested in hit records, but they understood it. So I identify a lot with the British. Keith Richards wrote a book called Life or something, and I wasn't crazy about the book, but there are 2 chapters in there that he explains the music. The book was worth just reading it for those 2 chapters.
Right. What does
Uh,
he say
uh,
about them?
he just talks about tunings and how the Stones listened to one record for a whole week. They would take a Jimmy Reed record and listen to it for a whole week and get all the nuances. That was their schooling. That was going to college for them. That's why they're so good. They knew the sound of the bass, where it's placed in the record, how the drummer played, if he played before the beat, after the beat, on the beat, the turnarounds on the guitar, what amps they used, how the sound they studied everything. It's amazing how he explains it, but he does it well because Thelonious Monk said talking about music is like dancing about architecture. In other words, just make the music. You don't have to talk about it. But Keith Richards talked about it. It was amazing.
You'd had Dave Edmunds produce one of your albums too.
The era you're talking about, it was an era where commercial music was great and great music was commercial. And then it started changing. You'd have to go to different stations to get different kinds of music. But the era that you're talking about was so creative with the Beatles and the Stones, and it's when great music was commercial. They were one and the same, not so much now. And Dave Edmunds, he studied all that music. He was a real historian, and he knew what was on all those records, all those great records, all those great Carl Perkins records, and all Chuck Berry's records. That was going to college for him.
There was a bit of a lull in your career during that period, and I think it was because of Stevie Van Zandt again and Bruce Springsteen that it was regurgitated one more time. Am I correct in saying that?
I've just made music over the years. I was up at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and Dave Marsh was interviewing me. And he said to me, Dion, you are the only guy from the 50s that has remained relevant and creative. And I started arguing with him. And it was hard to take in, but I lost the argument. So when I got home and I told my wife about it, and she said, what are you going to do about it? So I started making these albums. And the last 3 albums were just Sandy, I'm telling you, in the last 5 years, I wrote 40 of the best songs I've ever written. I asked Eric Clapton to join me on a song. I asked Peter Frampton, Mark Knopfler, Jeff Beck, some of the greatest guitar players on the planet. I had a ball making these albums.
So we really have to thank your wife Susan for reigniting it all in these past 5 years. I remember last time we spoke, you told me that she had insisted that you include Van Morrison on one of the albums because he was her favourite singer.
Yeah, absolutely.
She's been pretty influential on you, hasn't she, all these years?
I think so. I think I'll keep it. There's great stories about it in this book, The Rock and Roll Philosopher. She turned Dave Marsh's comment into a dare. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? So, yeah, it keeps me going.
Those albums that you talk about, can you just run through those very briefly for me?
There's one that's called Stomping Ground, and that was fun. Got Boz Scaggs to do a song, and Ricky Lee Jones, and just so many amazing artists Springsteen and Paul Simon. And I just kept asking people, but not so much just to ask them. I recorded the song, and then I was thinking, whose sound would just make this song even better? So, when you write a beautiful ballad, I went to Jeff Beck because he was the only guitar player that could make me cry. But I found out that Peter Frampton is just remarkable. He's a remarkable guitar player. We became fast friends. He's a great guy also.
Did anybody turn you down? Were you surprised that every one of the ones you asked actually said, yeah, I'll play with you, Dion?
Well, there were some people that were hard to get to, like Harry Connick Jr. I wanted him to play some piano. Couldn't get to him. John Mayer was busy, but most of the guys I contacted just said, like when Eric Clapton played on If You Want to Rock and Roll, it was so good that I called him up and I said, Eric, you sound like you're 19 years old. He said, Dion, I wanted to do a good job for you. I stood up in the studio. I didn't sit down. He said, I stood up. So I said, thank you.
They sent you all their files digitally. So you're working in a whole different way today than you started off, obviously, or had worked throughout most of your career. Did you manage to acclimatise to the whole new way of working very easily too?
Well, it's the same thing. They would be playing to the same exact thing if they were right in the studio with me. Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. Like Joanne Shaw Taylor, she's English, and I did an album called Girlfriends, and I sent her a track because she wasn't here at the time. And she took it into the studio and rocked out, man. She's a great guitar player. It came out great. I don't think I would have been able to make these three albums without this here computer thing.
Yeah, right.
We didn't have it in the 50s.
Of course.
Well, I'm one grateful guy that I could do it with this because, especially during COVID, nobody was going anywhere and everybody was home. So they were available and ready to go. And it was great. It was
Yeah.
a very creative time for me.
I
I
mean,
remember talking to you about it.
yes, exactly. I mean, I can't believe that you're in your 80s, you're in your mid 80s now, and you're still so together and with it. Perhaps the fact that you told me that your mother didn't pass till she was 104 has something to do with that. But you're so together. What do you put that down to?
Well, a couple of things. First of all, I don't know.
Like everyone else, yeah, I get that.
Sometimes, your life could change like this. So I'm just very grateful that I'm healthy and by the grace of God. But I got to say that I've been April 1st, I'm clean and sober, 57 years. So that helps a lot. I take care of myself. I'm always like walking or I go to the gym once in a while. I'm not a gym rat or anything, but I take care of myself. So I guess that's part of it. And
Absolutely.
my wife's a good cook. She makes a lot of good soups and salads and stuff. So here
Excellent.
I am.
Yeah. Dion, tell me about the book.
This new book. Well, it's the new book. It's called The Rock and Roll Philosopher, and it has 60 stories in it. And the reason why I call it the rock and roll philosopher is a philosopher is a lover of wisdom. And your philosophy is perfectly designed to produce the results you're getting. And that's what the book is about. It's like your belief system, where you actually see your belief system is in relationships. So there's a bunch of stories that I'm reflecting on, events in my life that I just reflect on, and usually has like a life lesson in it, how I got over or through something, like the Phil Spector story. Phil wasn't an easy guy to get along with, but I reveal how I did it, how I took him into a private room and how I talked to him privately, not publicly, privately. So I have all these little gems in the book, stories about Eddie Cochran, maybe Gene Vincent, and stories about Sam Cooke and Jackie Wilson, just Paul Simon, Lou Reed, just a lot of stories about music, stories about recovery, because I've been clean and sober 57 years. And there's stories about life and music, and a lot of stories about faith, because I think my faith is a big part of my life. It's where I get my substance,
Right.
and power
Yeah.
and wisdom and beauty and truth and goodness and all the serenity and the peace. I'm a funny guy. For a rock and roller, if you unzipped my head and looked inside my mind, you'd probably see a very orderly, peaceful place.
You've had to work hard to create that and keep that going, though, haven't you? And I guess what I'm hearing you say about this book is that it's not just stories of your life that people can get to know you and your friends a little bit better, but anybody reading it can gain that wisdom that you got too. So there's really tangible stuff that people can get out of this.
Actually, it's a book of mentoring. I wrote it with a friend of mine, Adam Jablin, and because he's a younger fella, a huge business guy, and he took a liking to me, and I kind of mentored him through a lot of different situations in life, and that's a big part of the book. I really feel like I had a lot of, like a philosopher's a lover of wisdom. Who doesn't love wisdom? Because it teaches you how to navigate through life, how to, otherwise you get stuck and you get argumentative and you get cynical and you get critical and you get self-pity and you spiral inward and you could become a real jerk. Hey, I'm not criticizing. I'm like, I know I was there.
Yeah,
Hello. There's a way to get out of it. There's a way.
yeah.
And you don't have to live like that. So the book is like actually, stories to take people to a higher reality, a higher ground, a higher pitch in life, because where you actually see your belief system, like I was saying, is in relationships, is with your wife, your kids, your friends, your coworkers. That's how you actually see it. It's not talking about it like a, virtue signal all day long and come off as like a self-righteous jerk. But where you actually see somebody's belief system is in their life, how they get along with their band. You could want to save the world. Like sometimes I was thinking of John Lennon the other day. I said, man, he wanted to save the world. He couldn't get along with his bandmates. Well, he's a human being. I love John Lennon. Hey, first one, he was my guy.
Why did you decide to do the book? Because you felt that you had so much to pass on?
Well, I would go out with my friend Adam, and we'd go out for lunch, and we'd be talking about different situations, and some friends were around. And you'd always hear, wow, I wish everybody was here to hear these stories. I wish my family could hear. I wish my friends could hear this. So Adam and I, we got the bright idea one day. Why don't we put it on voice memo or start documenting some of these? And after 5 years, we had 60 really great stories, and we'd hone them out. As we were talking, we remember them, and then we'd fill them in, and that's what the book is about. These they're conversations. They talk directly to you.
Yeah. And finally, Dion, there's even a Broadway show coming. It's called The Wanderer. And I know that's been in the pipeline for some time, but it's about to hit the stage this year, I believe.
Yeah, the producer and writer made a lot of decisions to get through the lockdown. And now that Broadway is back on its feet and it's not so anemic, it went through a rough period, but it's back. So right now they're looking for the theater because everything's in place. The show, there's nothing to do. It's all there. Written, done, scenery, it's all done. So they're just looking for the theater. And of course, the finances. They're always into that. So this year might be the year for us.
Of all the songs that you've written and released, do you have an absolute favourite one?
Oh my Lord.
Which one should we go out on here?
You know, I wrote one recent. Well, it's kind of recent. It's kind of a favorite of mine right now because I love the lyrics, the way the words come out of my mouth. It's written about a drunk. It's written about a guy who's really in self-pity, talk like he was saying. It's called Crying Shame. It's like, why do I wait when you won't come back? I'm on the wrong side of the zodiac. It's a crying shame. But Sonny Landreth played guitar on it, and it's right now I just like singing it because I like the way the words come out of my mouth.
Great. But we'll take a listen to it right now. And I'll let you go. You've been so generous with your time. As always, you're an amazing person, an amazing musician, and we have so much love and so much to share. We are very, very grateful to you, Dion.
Thank you, Sam. It's a joy to be with you, really.
All the very best to you. Till 104 at least. I hope we'll talk again. Thank you
Stay
so much.
well.
You too. Lots of love, Dion.
Great day.
Bye now.
Bye.
You too.